Hey guys, happy Thanksgiving if you're celebrating today. I thought I was feeling a little bit festive. I saw the title of this video called How US Thanksgiving Wasn't What I Expected. And yeah, I just got curious on what somebody from another country might think when they come here and celebrate this holiday. So yeah, let's get going.
As somebody who grew up 4,000 miles from my current home, the only frame of reference I had for the American life I now live was American TV and film. In the 80s, much like today, these infiltrated Britain in much the same way British music infiltrated America. As a child, I was in love with the Goonies, not to mention Andy from the Goonies. I watched Back to the...
Okay, I can't remember if I've ever seen that. I've heard it a million times, the words The Goonies, but yeah.
Future 47 times in the same week. And then at some point in the late 80s,
Everyone did.
I was introduced to a very specific American comedy. Now for context, you have to understand that back then, my dad used to go on business trips to London. And this was always quite exciting because it meant he'd return with a mystery VHS. Following a successful track record of delivering eye-popping entertainment, my dad apparently decided on a different approach with an American movie that I did not recognize.
Planes, trains and automobiles, said my very English dad. It's about a bloke who's trying to get home for, I think they call it Thanksgiving. It's meant to be right funny.
Given that I was expecting Karate Kid 2, my disappointment was palpable, and so the tape lay dormant until I was bored one Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, does this seem like something a kid would jump to watch?
I put it on, and sure enough, my dad was right. It was funny. To the extent that my best friend and I used to copy the bit where Steve Martin says the F word 18 times. Sorry, Mum, if you're just learning about that. But after several watches, there was one question that kept popping into my head. What on earth is Thanksgiving? Well, 20 years later, after moving to the United States, I found out firsthand, and it wasn't what I was expecting.
It wasn't? It's not that crazy.
The first surprise is that Thanksgiving wasn't simply another word for Christmas. And I know to Americans that might sound weird because Thanksgiving isn't Christmas. But the film gave me more than one reason to believe that it was. Firstly, they're driving around in lots of snow, which in Britain is a fairly rare event, but if it does occur, it usually does so in winter and not autumn. I have since realized and was reminded just the other day that in the American Midwest, thick snow in November, or Snowvember, is not uncommon. He loves it. Look at him.
Man.
He's so excited. You gonna run around, Arthur? You gonna run around? Secondly, in the film, while
Arthur's so cute. I wish we got snow like that. Nothing dangerous or anything, but down south it's just not as common. Like it'll just get a little cold and rarely we'll have snow.
while Steve Martin's wife is waiting for him to come home, I believe there's a quick shot of her lighting a candle, which we're not going to do right now because there's a cat here and I'll probably burn him. But that, in tandem with this winter feel, made it appear like a cheap Christmas card. Thirdly, Steve Martin's wife pulls from...
Wait a second. Okay, do y'all make turkey like this with the stuffing in it? I've never had that before, but it always just seems so like gross. For me, I'm sure that plenty of people think it's fine, but for me, it's just like, I don't know.
From the oven, a giant turkey, and that is not a euphemism. Turkey, of course, in Britain is mostly synonymous with the Christmas meal, and so this was a huge reason that I think, for the first 26 years of my life, I thought Thanksgiving on the one hand and Christmas on the other were actually one and the same. But
They were pretty similar when it comes to the meals for a lot of people. So I can kind of understand.
it turns out that not only is Thanksgiving not Christmas, it takes place in November, specifically the fourth Thursday in November. It didn't help that Steve Martin lived in a huge house in the Chicago suburbs, because that makes me think of one thing, Home Alone, which
Look at
is
the
a
kitty.
Christmas movie. Anyway, speaking of two films that featured the late great Sir Jonathan Candy, that brings us on to this. I didn't know it yet, but America was not alone in celebrating a holiday of this very name. I mean, cut me
Wait.
some slack, I barely knew that America did. Because as I've been doing this channel over the years, I've discovered that there are Canadians in the world, and they watch. Hello. And usually, whenever I do any kind of Thanksgiving-themed content, I get those really polite comments that are along the lines of, Lawrence, you disgrace. You forgot about Canadian Thanksgiving again, so I'm inserting it into this video to appease you. John Candy, the greatest Canadian.
Wait, he's in the middle of it. I know he's in the middle of saying something. I didn't even realize Canadians I never claimed to be smart, guys. I'm about to say something dumb. I didn't know Canadians even celebrated Thanksgiving, really. Not like us. And it's in October? Oh my gosh.
Ian, after Bret the Hitman Hart, would not have celebrated Thanksgiving the same day as his character in Planes, Trains and Automobiles, because it turns out that Canada does theirs on the second Monday in October. And given that Canada also does Boxing Day, if you took all of the North American holidays, the holiday season would never end. It would be 3 solid months of eating and vomiting. Before I knew better, I never once questioned the inherent meaning of Thanksgiving, that we gather to celebrate the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ and open lots of presents. But during my first Thanksgiving party, which happened about 2 weeks after I moved to the United States, it became clear at that point that this was in addition to Christmas, and so I was quickly onto the business of eating, but also asking these friends and family members.
Honestly, that's really the biggest part of Thanksgiving, the food. That's like the main event.
At the table, what's all this about? And this was actually at a college campus, so for them it was about getting drunk. But, you know, after a few solid pints, I managed to get out of them that the day is all about giving thanks. The clue is in the name. It's about giving thanks for this bountiful harvest of food that we have at this table, or just in America. I'm not going to do a deep dive on the history of this, but what I am going to do is just give you my observation of how Americans display that gratitude. I don't think I've been to a single Thanksgiving family meal with her family and not sat there while another family member, usually a bloke, I don't know why that is, says, "Let's say grace." So I do. Grace. And at that point, everybody in the room looks at me and says, "Shut up, you clown." And
don't mind him. Oh my gosh.
They, basically thank the Lord for all of this wonderful food that we are about to eat to excess. But I think it's more than that, because I think that something that I suppose we never got to see in Planes, Trains and Automobiles is the actual event, the sitting round the table, because Thanksgiving is a joyous occasion, and I don't know that that's just because people feel extra thankful that day, or if it's this. It's a holiday with very little pressure, unless you're the one cooking all the food, then there's a lot of pressure. But unlike Christmas, you don't have to buy presents for anybody, so that's nice. And because it falls on a Thursday, some employers might even give their employees the Friday off, so therefore you get a 4-day weekend, which is a bloody rare thing in America. In Britain, this exact scenario plays out if indeed Christmas and Boxing Day are immediately before or immediately after the weekend. In either case, in my experience, you'll probably spend those 4 days eating turkey sandwiches.
And while we're on the subject of meat, a YouTube sensation like me needs all the fuel he can get for creating the second best videos on the internet. That's why I'm using today's sponsor, Good Chop. Good Chop delivers boxes of high-quality proteins to your door on your schedule. And something that pleased me was that the food came vacuum-packed, which is useful for those of us with tiny freezers. And perhaps as a warm-up to the turkey that I'll be eating on Thanksgiving, and the day after Thanksgiving, and the day after Thanksgiving, I instead opted for pork. I seasoned it with a few herbs, or herbs to Americans, and placed it into the oven until the internal temperature reached around 160. It came out smelling delightful, and as a wise man once said, if in doubt, always follow your nose. So I did. No, I mean it when I say this. It was about the best pork that I've ever had, and most certainly that I've ever cooked. If you're someone who wants convenient but exceedingly well-prepared meat at an affordable price, Good Chop's prices start at $3.32 per portion. Go to goodchop.com/YouTube and use code LOSTPOND130, or click the link in the caption below to get $130 off across your first 4 boxes.
The basic premise of Planes, Trains and Automobiles is, of course, a send-up of actual US travel patterns around Thanksgiving. According to AAA, around 80 million Americans travel at least 50 miles at this time of year. And routinely, I'm one of them. I suppose that's what happens when you start your American life in Indiana and then move to Chicago and leave behind a lot of family members that you inherited. Well, this kind of thing, I've come to find, is the reality for a lot of Americans. And so, like Steve Martin's character, they might use all manner of transport to try to get where they need to go. Now, admittedly, most of the time, we will drive those hundreds of miles in a car. But one time, when we were less rich, we used Megabus. And there was something profoundly disappointing about that. It's that the people on the bus didn't start singing the theme tune cartoon to the Flintstones, which happens in Planes, Trains and Automobiles.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones.
Now, in hindsight, this is sort of weird because if anyone's going to break out into song, it is Americans. I pointed out in my recent road trip video that this is a fairly common occurrence with inside the walls of a car. Do cars have walls? I don't know. But in my experience, this sort of thing doesn't happen on buses, largely because nobody wants to be there and we're all terrified of strangers. Happy holidays. But when it comes to travelling for the holidays, I think Planes, Trains and Automobiles did get one thing right, and that's that American trains are unreliable.
Yeah.
What I'm about to say is a spoiler for a 37-year-old film. So if you haven't seen Planes, Trains and Automobiles, put me on mute for 20 seconds.
I haven't, but I've heard about it a lot. I really should watch it, though. It sounds kind of
and don't be tempted to lip read. At the end of the movie, Steve Martin takes a lonely John Candy back to his huge house in the Chicago suburbs. And when they get there, the family is so happy to see them. Paul Young is playing in the background, and it's just a rousing finish to the film. There's just one problem. Where are the other 20 people, Steve? I mean, I know you turned up late, so maybe they all left. But my experience is if you've got a house as big as that, you'll have cousins, second cousins, some guy named Todd that nobody recognizes. Yeah. Because Americans, much more than the British, like to go all out when it comes to invitations. On the one hand, it can be overwhelming for introverts such as myself. On the other, it does give me more people to turn to when my wife's cousin Chad tries to get me to look at his comic collection.
Same.
Had I known the...
We don't really throw a big party anymore. I did when we did when I was a kid, but now it's like, I don't know. I'm an introvert too, though, so I understand.
Extent of a Thanksgiving meal, I might have overcome my Christmas confusion much sooner. But it seems to me that Steve Martin's wife's turkey, again, not a euphemism, was in fact a ruse. Because when you take into account some of the other food items that are common at a Thanksgiving dinner table, there's not really a lot of crossover with British Christmas at all. Firstly, there's no Christmas pudding, obviously. And instead of mince pies, you have one of either pecan pie, my favourite, pumpkin pie made out of real pumpkins and not whatever the hell this travesty is from Target, or sweet potato pie, or about 100 other pies. And sure, as I told YouTube sensation Evan Edinger the other day, you know, I gave up added sugar, I'm not going to eat this with you. But back when I wasn't, pies contribute heavily to making this my favourite of the American holidays. And then there's the sides. I remember sitting around the table not dissimilar to this, and my wife said, I want stuffing, which left me mortified until I realised she meant the food. And so I passed her stuffing, to which she said, that's not stuffing, that's oyster dressing. The stuffing is on the far side of the table. Well, they look the same to me. What is this? I've never heard of oyster dressing. Well, it turns out I should have. Oyster dressing, a bread-filled dish typically enjoyed...
Ooh, what is it? I actually don't know what this is.
In the South and by at least one family in the Midwest. Actually...
The South? What are you talking about? Do y'all eat this a lot? I mean, we never have, but it could be good.
Originated in Britain. The first known reference to oyster dressing can be found in a 1685 edition of The Accomplished, a cookery book by the English chef Robert May. Anyway, the recipe, then a mixture of oysters, bacon, herbs and spices, was brought to North America by British colonists, first showing up in American print more than a century later in Amelia Simmons' American Cookery. Suffice to say, the stuffing or dressing that I've had in the United States is usually quite a lot different to the stuffing that I had in Britain. Partly that comes down to texture, but secondarily, it comes down to the shape. Back in Britain where I come from, it was not uncommon to have stuffing balls, which that is a euphemism. However, in the US, stuffing is often not as congealed, a sort of bread-heavy free-for-all inside a casserole dish, themselves more prevalent in US kitchens than British ones. I'm probably generalizing heavily with everything I've said in this video, but for the most part, that's been my experience. Oh, it's funny how life works out. 35 years after I first laid eyes on planes, trains and automobiles, I've come to appreciate it on a level my childhood brain couldn't have comprehended. Not only have the things listed in this video become annually ingrained into my life, but as fate would have it, I too now live in a suburb of Chicago. It's just that my house is marginally smaller than Steve Martin's. And so I suppose that I'm thankful for life imitating art. But I'm also thankful for my late father for deciding in a moment of clarity not to buy Karate Kid 2. So let me know in the comments what you're thankful for, and until next time, goodbye.
That was cute. I like that video. This was by Lost in the Pond, and I've never seen a video of his before, but I'll just subscribe. And yeah, I like Thanksgiving too because it's like yeah, he's right, there's not a lot of pressure. It's just kind of a chill day almost. Like Well, at least for us. And yeah, cooking is like a huge process, but it's always really fun. So I'm going to leave this video in the description. You can let me know in the comments if there's something you want me to watch. I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving. If you're celebrating, I gotta go to the kitchen. I gotta go start preparing some food. So I will see y'all in the next video.